The conquest of space is worth the risk of life. Our God-given curiosity will force us to go there ourselves because, in the final analysis, only man can fully evaluate the moon in terms understandable to other men.
Is there anything scary about a first space flight, even though you've flown many hours in conventional aircraft, jet aircraft?
Oh, I don't like to say anything scary about it. There's a lot of unknowns, of course, and a lot of problems that could develop or might develop, and they'll have to be solved. And that's what we're there for. This is our business, to find out if this thing will work for us.
The feeling that a pilot has and that a test pilot has, that I look forward a great deal to the first flight. There's a great deal of pride involved in making a first flight. So I think I'm looking forward to the flight with a great deal of anticipation.
The law of averages, so far as the possibility of a catastrophic failure, bother you at all, sir?
No, you sort of have to put that out of your mind. There's always a possibility that you can have a catastrophic failure. Of course, it's going to happen on any flight. It can happen on the last one as well as the first one. So you just plan as best you can to take care of all of these eventualities.
Hello, my name is Isabella and my name is Kaydin, and this is our project, Apollo 1.
July 29th, 1958 was a day that would change the history of space travel forever. It all started with one man, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the signing of a new revolution that would become NASA. The driving force of NASA was the launch of the Soviet satellite Sputnik. Following Sputnik, events moved quickly towards the development of NASA. NASA is responsible for the science and technology related to anything air and space.
NASA would continue to work on space technology until they began a program of human spaceflight. As they continued to work on their goal, landing a man on the moon, the Apollo 1 tragedy occurred. The tragedy was a major setback for NASA, but despite all this, NASA did the unexpected, rising above tragedy and coming out victorious. This brings us to the big question. Can humans every day push forward past tragedy and come out on top?
Soon after NASA started, they launched the Mercury and Gemini missions. But it wasn't until January 27, 1967, that NASA launched their first Apollo mission, Apollo 1, that would change the path for human spaceflight exploration. NASA had a goal set by John F. Kennedy to land a man on the moon and return him safely back to Earth.
The crew, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, were training for an Earth-orbiting mission at Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 34. At 1 p.m., the astronauts entered the capsule. Immediately upon entering, a number of minor problems erupted inside the rocket, the Saturn IB AS-204. Because of this, the flight was delayed and forced to count down at 5:40 p.m.
As the crew entered the module, little did they know their lives were about to change forever. At 6:31 p.m., an electrical surge was recorded, possibly indicating a short circuit. Not much later, Roger Chaffee is heard saying "flames," and that was all it took for the fire to spread all throughout the cabin. The large amount of flammable material throughout the cabin allowed the fire to start and spread rapidly. All while this was happening, the crew outside the ship was working to get the hatch open, which took at least 90 seconds to open. But when they got it open, it was too late.
It wouldn't be until later that the 3 astronauts' bodies were recovered. A medical board determined that the cause of death was carbon monoxide asphyxia, with thermal burns as contributed causes. As the country mourned, the bodies were buried in an abandoned miso silo that contained the debris from the Space Shuttle Challenger. The tragedy hit hard for America, and most importantly, NASA. For Apollo 1 had been one of the worst disasters the program has ever faced. Despite this, NASA still managed to rise above the ashes and come out victorious.
Soon after the astronauts were buried, NASA created a tribute for the Apollo 1 crew at Kennedy Space Center, Florida. The tribute features displays that tell the story of the lives of the astronauts, the fire and the pain inflicted. Going back to the big question, can people push past tragedy and come out on top? As humans, we are designed to give up at points in our life, but little do we know we tend to face victory every day. Like NASA, we all face tragedy at some point, but it's up to us whether we decide to put it behind us and keep thriving.
NASA shows this by not giving up on their space missions after the Apollo 1 fire. Even though the fire was a tragedy, NASA and its space missions benefited from the fire and the astronauts' death. Following the fire, a number of changes were made during the program over the next year and a half, including the hatch, which opened outward. removing much of the flammable material in the module and recording all changes and modifications to the spacecraft more precisely.
These changes proved to be useful in the future Apollo launches, for it was Apollo 11 that landed the first men on the moon. But if it wasn't for the Apollo 1 fire and the other space missions, NASA would have never made it to the moon. In the end, it all comes down to truly never giving up, and in doing so, it benefits you in the end. As Neil Armstrong would say, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I was privileged to fly 4 times on the shuttle. My first flight was on Columbia in January of 1986, and then right after that, 10 days after my first flight, we lost Challenger. And so we spent the next almost 3 years recovering and getting back to flight. And my second flight was flown in 1990 when we deployed the Hubble Space Telescope. My third flight was flown in 1992 on Atlantis. And then I came back and flew my final flight in the spring of 1994. And when I retired, we went back to Houston, and that was where I got a call and went up and interviewed with President Obama and became the NASA administrator. They think that the Apollo 1 fire and the loss of the crew, unfortunately, probably saved the program. And we probably would not have gotten to the moon, at least not when we got there. Several things we learned. One was about having pure oxygen in a cabin. We learned about the direction in which, or the way that hatches to get the crews in and out of the vehicles should open, because in Apollo 1, the hatch opened to the inside, and a number of other physical changes, design changes to the vehicle as a result of Apollo 1. People who may never have thought at all that they were going to make a difference in what was going on in the organization, but through their own personal sacrifice, people really began to work harder than they would have before. So Apollo 1 is sort of that type of mission for us, and everybody in NASA today always harkens back to the day that we lost the Apollo crew. Apollo 1's probably saved the Apollo program and probably made it possible for us to get to the moon.
I think of triumph and tragedy as triumph being something like a high point in your life and tragedy being something like a low point in your life, and everybody's going to run into it.
Triumph and tragedy to me is similar to cause and effect. You can't have one without having the other. So for example, us as humans, we aren't designed to be perfect, so we are bound to hit low points in our life. But at the same time, we also have high points, essentially triumph.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program.
Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward, drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.